Harlem changed after midnight. The music slowed but never stopped. Trumpets cried through basement clubs. Laughter spilled from smoke-filled rooms. Numbers runners moved like ghosts between street lamps, carrying slips of paper worth more than most paychecks. Power in Harlem didn't wear uniforms. It wore tailored suits and quiet confidence. And on one winter night, that power was about to be tested. Word began traveling through alleyways and barber shops before anyone saw proof. 12 men had entered Harlem. Not tourists, not businessmen, professionals. Armed, organized, sent with a single purpose: eliminate Bumpy Johnson. The order, according to whispers, came from Dutch Schultz, a man whose reputation for violence was as precise as it was ruthless. Schultz didn't negotiate when territory and money were involved. He erased obstacles. Some say Bumpy heard about the hit hours before it reached the streets. Others believe he learned about it the moment it surrounded him. Either way, witnesses later described him walking through Harlem that night with his usual slow, deliberate stride. No body armor, no visible panic. Just the calm rhythm of a man who understood danger as part of daily business. The trap closed near one of Harlem's busiest gambling routes. Entry points blocked, exits watched. 12 gunmen spread across rooftops, doorways, and shadowed corners. The message was obvious. Harlem's independence was ending, and it would end publicly enough to send fear through every numbers runner, club owner, and street boss who depended on Bumpy's protection. For a moment, Harlem itself seemed to pause. Conversations stopped midst and slub doors stayed half open. People watched from behind curtains, knowing that if these assassins succeeded, it would not just remove a leader. It would invite outside control into every corner of the neighborhood. Legend says something unexpected happened next. Instead of running, he stopped. Instead of reaching for a weapon, he spoke. Witnesses would later describe his voice as calm, almost bored, like a businessman correcting a bad investment. Some say he reminded the gunman how much money Harlem generated. Others claim he explained what would happen if his death sparked chaos across the city's gambling networks. And some insist he simply stood there long enough to make 12 trained killers question their own certainty. What truly happened in those few minutes remains buried under decades of rumor and underworld mythology. But one detail never changes. By sunrise, 12 men had entered Harlem. Only one man walked back out, and the message he carried would shake the confidence of one of New York's most feared crime bosses. Long before Harlem spoke his name with a mixture of fear and admiration. Bumpy Johnson was simply Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, a boy growing up in the harsh realities of early 20th century America. His childhood was shaped by poverty, racial tension, and the constant presence of danger. Violence was not something distant or shocking, it was part of everyday survival. From an early age he understood that strength alone was not enough. Survival required intelligence, patience, and control. Stories about his youth often describe him as different from other boys his age. While many learned survival through street fights and reckless bravado, Bumpy developed a quieter weapon in his mind. He developed a fascination with books, poetry, and philosophy. Some who knew him later claimed he could recite complex verses while planning criminal operations with surgical precision. Others believed this unusual combination of intellect and street awareness made him unpredictable and deeply intimidating. His early life was also shaped by loss and separation. Family struggles forced him to mature quickly. Responsibility arrived earlier than childhood should allow. These pressures hardened him but also taught him discipline. He learned to observe before acting. He learned to listen before speaking. Most importantly, he learned that emotional reactions often led to fatal mistakes. When he eventually moved to Harlem, he stepped into a neighborhood experiencing cultural transformation. Jazz music, political activism, artistic movements, and underground gambling businesses thrived side by side. Harlem was alive, vibrant, and dangerous. It was also an opportunity for someone who understood both people and power. Instead of rushing into crime blindly, Bumpy studied the neighborhood's underground economy. He watched how money flowed through numbers, rackets, and illegal betting operations. He paid attention to how leaders gained loyalty. Many gangsters ruled through fear alone. Bumpy noticed something important. Fear created obedience, but respect created long-term control. He began forming relationships carefully. He earned trust among workers, street collectors, and local residents who relied on the underground economy for survival. He became known as a man who rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal quietly but decisively. Violence, when necessary, was never reckless. It was calculated and controlled, which made it far more terrifying. Some say Harlem didn't shape Bumpy Johnson. Others believe Bumpy Johnson slowly shaped Harlem. What remains clear is that his early years created a man who understood power as a psychological weapon. By the time rivals began noticing his rise, he had already mastered the art of patience, and patience, in the criminal world, was often more dangerous than aggression. By the time whispers of his name began spreading across Harlem's underground economy, Bumpy Johnson was no longer just a rising street figure. He had become something far more dangerous, a strategist, building influence quietly while others fought loudly for attention. Harlem during this era was a battlefield disguised as a cultural paradise. Jazz clubs, gambling dens, and underground businesses generated enormous profits. And every dollar flowing through the neighborhood represented power waiting to be claimed. Bumpy entered the numbers racket, one of Harlem's most lucrative gambling operations, with discipline that separated him from ordinary criminals. Where others relied on chaos and intimidation, he introduced structure. Payments were organized. Collections were predictable. Workers received protection and steady income. This reliability transformed his operations into something resembling a business empire rather than a street gang. People began trusting him, and in Harlem, trust could be more valuable than fear. His leadership style created loyalty that extended deep into the community. Numbers, runners, club owners, and local residents began viewing him as more than a crime. Thus, he became a provider who ensured money circulated back into the neighborhood. Some say this connection made Harlem protect him as fiercely as he protected Harlem. Others believe it gave him intelligence networks that allowed him to anticipate threats before they materialized. Unlike many gang leaders, Bumpy rarely displayed open aggression. Rivals who challenged him often found themselves losing influence without public confrontations. Businesses shifted loyalty quietly. Street rumors replaced gunfire. This psychological warfare strengthened his reputation. Enemies feared him because they could never predict how he would respond. His calm personality made negotiations feel like interrogations, and his silence often carried more pressure than threats. As his influence expanded, it inevitably attracted attention from powerful organized crime families operating across New York. These syndicates viewed Harlem's gambling economy as a resource that should fall under their control. Yet Bumpy remained independent, managing to cooperate when necessary while refusing to surrender authority over his territory. Some say his greatest skill was patience, waiting for the perfect moment to act while opponents exhausted themselves through reckless violence. Others believe his true power came from understanding people better than they understood themselves. Either way, his rise created a rare phenomenon in the criminal world. A leader who commanded fear, respect, and loyalty simultaneously, and that rare balance would soon place him directly in the crosshairs of men who believed power belonged only to those strong enough to take it. Power in New York's criminal world was never permanent. It shifted like smoke, controlled by whoever could dominate territory, money, and fear. Dutch Schultz understood this better than most. Known for explosive violence and relentless business ambition, Schultz built his empire through intimidation and swift retaliation. He believed control was not negotiated, it was enforced. And in his eyes, Harlem represented unfinished business. By the time Schultz began focusing on Harlem, he had already established himself as one of the most feared bootlegging and gambling bosses in New York. His operations stretched across boroughs, feeding massive streams of illegal income. But Harlem remained outside his direct control, and that independence irritated him. Reports about Bumpy Johnson only fueled his obsession. Schultz heard stories of a disciplined leader who ruled through loyalty instead of chaos, a man whose influence grew stronger without public displays of brutality. To Schultz, this was dangerous. Independent operators threatened the balance of organized crime, especially when they controlled territory rich with gambling profits. Harlem's numbers racket generated enormous revenue, and every dollar not flowing through Schultz's network represented lost power. But beyond money, Schultz viewed Harlem's independence as disrespect. Allowing one leader to operate freely could inspire others to resist syndicate control. Unlike some mob bosses who preferred negotiation or partnership, Schultz believed in crushing resistance quickly and decisively. Intelligence from his informants suggested that removing Bumpy would destabilize Harlem's entire operation. Without its central leader, the neighborhood's criminal economy would fracture, allowing Schultz to step in and claim control without prolonged conflict. Some historians believe Schultz underestimated the loyalty Bumpy commanded within Harlem. Others argue Schultz understood the risk, but believed overwhelming force would erase opposition before resistance could organize. Either way, he reportedly assembled a team designed not just for intimidation, but total elimination. The plan was simple, brutal, effective. Send enough men to guarantee success. 12 gunmen were selected, experienced, disciplined, and loyal. Their mission was not to negotiate tribute or demand cooperation. Their mission was to remove Harlem's king and send a message to every independent operator watching from the shadows. What Schultz may not have fully understood was that Harlem was not just territory, it was a community tied together by loyalty, reputation, and survival. And removing its leader would not be as simple as pulling a trigger soon. 12 armed men would enter Harlem believing they were delivering a final order. Instead, they were walking into a legend waiting to be written. The night the trap closed around Bumpy Johnson did not begin with shouting or gunfire. It began with silence, the kind that spreads when something powerful is about to break. Harlem's streets carried their usual rhythm. Music floated through club doors. Dice games echoed in back alleys, but hidden within that normal chaos, 12 gunmen carefully moved into position, carrying orders believed to come directly from Dutch Schultz. They were not reckless street shooters. They were selected for discipline and precision. Each man had a role. Entrances were covered. Escape routes were watched. Rooftops provided clear sightlines. The operation was designed with overwhelming certainty. No mistakes. No survival. Legends differ on how Bumpy first noticed the ambush. Some say he saw it in reflections from store windows. Others claim informants warned him moments before he walked into danger. What nearly every story agrees on is his reaction. He did not run. He did not run. He did not reach for protection. He continued walking with the same calm pace that had built his reputation across Harlem. Witnesses later described the moment as unreal. A circle of armed men tightening around a single figure who showed no visible fear. Some versions of the story claim Bumpy removed his hat and spoke first, forcing the assassins to pause. Others insist he simply stood there long enough for tension to become unbearable. Either way, he transformed the encounter from an execution into a psychological battle. According to Underworld folklore, Bumpy spoke about business, not survival. He reportedly explained how Harlem's gambling network functioned like a living machine, producing profit for multiple criminal organizations. Killing him, he suggested, would not create control, it would create chaos. Rival groups would fight for power. Police attention would increase. Revenue would collapse. The message was simple: his survival was more valuable than his death. Some say his confidence unsettled the gunmen. Others believe they hesitated because Harlem itself was watching. Windows filled with shadows. Club doors opened just enough to observe, the neighbor hauler silently choosing sides. And that pressure weighed heavily on men trained only for violence. What happened next remains buried in myth. Certain stories claim shots were fired but missed their target. Others insist no one pulled the trigger at all. But one detail remains consistent. Across every version, the operation failed. When the night ended and the streets returned to their usual rhythm, 12 assassins had entered Harlem. Only one man would return to explain why they could not finish the job.